The Library of Sleep, a short story by Christopher Wynn. Quite unexpectedly, Melina found herself at the doorstep of a great library. How she knew it was a library was a mystery to her, excepting a rich smell evocative of yellowed pages which the place exuded. For in appearance it resembled a cathedral. Hideous gargoyles brooded overhead, whilst sunlight glistened off stained-glass window panes affixed to gargantuan blocks of stone. Timidly she grasped the door-knocker before her, a snake eating its own tail, and knocked thrice. The wooden slabs parted as unseen hinges squealed, revealing a circular antechamber of polished marble, which was starkly furnished except for a pearlescent throne in its center. Upon this throne lounged a smirking sphinx, muscles rippling as it tilted its head to better observe the newcomer. Melina felt a shiver trickle down her spine as the beast licked its lips and rose to a proper posture. Upon clearing its throat, the beast commenced to ask her a series of questions which Melina could never entirely recall, though she dimly recollected that they had to do with her motive for entering the library, of which she had none. This pleased the Sphinx, who, his questioning completed, instructed Melina to circumambulate the antechamber until she had returned to the door from which she had entered. She did so dubiously, keeping a wary eye on the Sphinx as she went, and gasped almost audibly upon the completion of her circuit to find that the door was no longer there, but had been replaced by a burgundy-carpeted room full of tables and people, beyond which loomed the heavy-laden, sky-high shelves of the largest library she had ever seen. One of the nearest-seated strangers chimed his teacup to attract her attention. She faced him inquisitively, taking in the sight of an elderly Asian man in purple pinstripe trousers and a matching vest, whose bronze name tag garishly announced Head Librarian. A jet-black pipe jutted from his light-colored beard, and one of his elbows rested upon a stack of books with eccentric titles such as The Suicide Notes of Narcissus and Juvenilia of the Geriatric. He smiled softly and asked her to take a seat. She thanked him and obliged, nodding affirmatively as he inquired whether or not she would like tea. Pleased, he selected a teacup from the tray before him and filled it, sliding it gingerly toward her. "I trust the Sphinx was civil?" he asked. "More or less," she replied. He nodded, puffing patiently at his pipe. His job is a grave one. He must in a single interview determine whether or not a person can be entrusted with the information housed herein. "Yours are no ordinary books, then." The librarian shrugged. "Books are like chemicals. All are equally benign or volatile, depending upon the substance with which they come into contact." Sucking to no avail upon his pipe stem, he reached for a match. Melina took a sip of the tea and briefly perceived her surroundings not as composites, but as individual particles all threading in and out of one another, one moment forming fractals of dizzying complexity, the next moment reduced to gibberish constellations. She put down the teacup and drank no more. "Still," continued the librarian, "I must concede that we possess certain rarities considered unfit for mass consumption. They have been studied thoroughly and deemed possibly edifying to individuals, but assuredly disastrous for collectives." He met her gaze and noted her confusion empathetically. "But forgive my want of decorum." He rose, dusting flecks of tobacco from his vest, and took a slight bow. "I am Corvus, head librarian, and this is the Library of Sleep." Melina blinked. "Pardon, but where exactly are we, sir? I mean, where is this library located?" Corvus chuckled, bringing the lit match to his pipe. "We have in our possession every book that was, is, and will be, yet none of them answer that question. Trust me, I've looked." Melina rose and curtsied to her host. "In that case, I am entirely at your mercy. Pray tell me if you know my reason for being here, or how I might get back home." Tossing the spent match into his teacup, Corvus steadied her with a gleam in his eye. "You've come for the same reason everyone enters a library, to find a book, and I expect you will return home immediately after doing so." "But I don't know what book I'm looking for." "Ah," said Corvus, "those are the best library visits. Follow me, please." With that, he turned abruptly and hastened to the horizon of bookshelves. Melina matched his stride, casting a backwards glance at the other seated strangers. "Those others, who are they?" Corvus motioned with his pipe. "My assistants, deceased bibliophiles, those to whom heaven is a library." As they neared the labyrinth of shelves, Melina became concerned. "How does one navigate this library? I see no labels on the shelves or books, nor even an indication of each row's genre. One must be willing to find the correct book without wanting to find a specific book. A similar principle applies to finding the library itself. As for genres, this library houses but one genre, and thus does not feel the need to designate it. Which genre is that? The genre that contains all others, the absurd and surreal. Melina paused. "So I'll know my book when I see it?" Corvus nodded. "In the meantime, perhaps we can entertain ourselves by discussing other interesting specimens along the way. That is, if you would humor an old librarian. I'd be delighted." Corvus began to puff his pipe vigorously as they continued, scanning the shelves and occasionally stopping to examine and usually reject a prospective conversation piece. Finally he stooped and selected a volume with satisfaction. A fine collection, Pacifistic Tracts by Forgotten Soldiers. A distant ancestor of yours made his prosaic debut on page 837, a reflection on the psychic trauma of being speared to death in the prehistoric savannah, as well as how he recovered from it over 5 subsequent lifetimes. In the final passage, he reveals that he was able to forgive the transgressing soul to such an extent that they became best childhood friends some 12 lifetimes hence. Quite touching. Melina thumbed through the pages. "I can't read it." "Oh, forgive me," said Corvus. "I had forgotten that your species hasn't yet rediscovered that language. What about this one?" He stood on tiptoes to pluck another volume from overhead. Melina examined the cover. Treatises on Logic by the Utterly Insane. Chock full of serial killers turned authors, that one. Their arguments are disturbingly compelling. Melina raised an eyebrow. "Never fear. If I internalized every compelling argument I've read, I would have abandoned corporeality long ago. That's what's wrong with most ghosts and gods. Can't compartmentalize. End up having to meditate for a few eons just to recall their own names. Speaking of, we're just a few aisles over from a real treat." They continued walking. "So," Melina began nonchalantly, "you mean to say that you believe in ghosts and gods?" "Believe in? No. That would be both an inadequate and awkward way of wording it." "All right. You know them to exist?" "That, my dear, depends on your definition of know. Take myself, for example. You are seeing me with your eyes right now, and surely you've also seen things in your peripheral vision only to turn and find that they weren't or aren't there." Melina nodded. "Well, who is to say that I, or anyone who has ever stood before you, is not just as fleeting or illusory as those phantasms? True, the sensor of your brain more quickly disregards the sensory input that they consist of than the input which I consist of, but that could merely suggest that I am a better fake, a virus programmed to act like genuine software while under scrutiny." Melina laughed. "Don't be ridiculous." Corvus stared at her blankly. "I know of a text that would alter your current perception of patterns to such an extent that you could be in a crowd of people but believe or know yourself to be utterly alone." Melina adjusted her dress nervously. "But what would be the point of that?" Corvus continued. "We all feel that way from time to time. Everything is just a game of semantics to you, isn't it?" "Of course. It's the same with you and everyone you know. Language is the game that precedes and makes possible all other games. Without or let there be light, there is naught but a spirit suspended above a void. Melina felt suddenly dizzy, though she did not know why. Corvus took the pipe from his mouth and scratched his beard. Sorry, that's the trouble with readers. We like to singe others with the flames that have purified us. Here, smoke some of this. Melina drew lightly on the pipe. Unlike the tea that had made her see particles, the smoke made vibrations visible. Corvus held up his hand. Watch. He snapped his fingers. The vibration radiated outwards like the ripple caused by a fallen droplet upon still water. As the sound faded, Melina was shocked to see the vibration rebound upon itself, returning and disappearing between Corvus's fingers. He snatched the pipe away from her lips. "What?" she began. "No more freebies," said Corvus. "That one will give you plenty to think about." They entered a new aisle of shelves. "Here," said Corvus, "I'll only be a moment." Taking his pipe firmly between his teeth, he climbed up one of the rolling ladders and returned moments later with an exceptionally heavy tome. "Forgive my forwardness, but am I correct that you recently miscarried your first child?" Melina stiffened. "Yes. Why?" He turned the book's spine so that Melina might read it. It read, "Odes to Life by the Stillborn." Tears filled her eyes. "I thought—" Corvus handed her the book. "Well, I'll be in the next aisle when you're finished." Some minutes later, Melina laid a hand on the seated librarian's shoulder. Corvus looked up from a book and closed it. The collected love letters of devil and deity, dense, even for me. He produced a handkerchief for her eyes and commenced relighting his pipe. Melina knelt down to the librarian, stayed his nervous hands, and kissed him. He returned her kiss meekly and withdrew. "Your boy was quite the poet, wasn't he?" She nodded. "But that wasn't the book, was it?" "No." "Well, let's keep searching." Soon, arms around one another's shoulders, they found it. Corvus stooped and took it from the bottom shelf, a tattered volume almost small enough to fit into a breast pocket. He raised an eyebrow, handing it to her. The cover read, "To Resuscitate a Dying World." Melina thumbed through the pages. "This is it." Corvus shook his head. "Such books are sour in the mouth and sweet in the stomach, and mammalian digestion is oh so slow. Society will burn you as a witch, and then burn offerings to you as a goddess." Melina's eyes gleamed. "Will I see you again?" "Of course. Every book must be returned." Corvus continued speaking, but his voice grew distant and distorted. Melina awoke. She had an idea.